It's rusting in green. Afternoon light, typewriters dreaming. All through the night, a smiling sun hangs on a cardboard sky, where the future got lost but never learned to die. Unseen visions burning bright. Bradbury's ghost on SL tonight. Open the page, let the wonder ignite. Welcome to SL tonight.
Humans are slow. I knew the first night they moved in. Pretty colors, pretty songs. Too pretty, too perfect. They don't eat, they don't sleep. They just watch and wait. Same way I do. The woman feeds them seed. The man whistles back. They whistle better. They whistle things he said yesterday. Things he only thought. I sit on the sill and listen. Cats understand patience. Tonight the moon is right. Tonight the latch clicks open by itself. The woman will scream. The man will run. And I'll still be here, because some doors were never meant for pause. Sweet bell humans, our feathered friends are singing you to bed. The hot, hard August sunshine poured its pale and blazing gold over the countryside. At the crest of the hill, which overlooked a county and a half, the tiny motor car drawn up to the side of the dusty road, which wound up the hill like a white, wire-eye band, looked not so much mechanical as insectile. It looked like the Brobdingnagian beetle, which, wings folded, had settled for a moment's sleepy basking in a fierce sunshine. Beside the car, seeming almost ludicrously out of proportion with it, stood a man and a woman. The sum of their ages could not have exceeded 45. The dress of the girl, which was silken and slight, would not, as all events upon her charming body, have done aught save grace a car as large and costly as this one was minute and cheap. But the clothes of the boy, despite his youth and erect comeliness, were somehow eloquent of more worth, a careful and not intelligent quirkiness pursued in the city of London, and a pseudo-charitable arrangement whereby the bee-like motor car should be purchased for many pounds more than its actual worth, in small but almost eternal slices. The girl was hatless, and her clipped golden poll glittered in the sun rays. She looked and was cool despite the great heat of the afternoon. The boy in his tweed jacket, thick flannel trousers, and over-tight collar, at whose front blazed a tie which hoped to look like that of some famous school or college, was hot, and very hot. He pulled his hat from his dark head and mopped at his brow with a vivid handkerchief. "Who? Hot enough for you, V?" She wriggled slim, half-covered shoulders. "It's a treat," she said. She gazed about her with wide blue eyes. She looked down and around at the pony and a half. "Where's this, Jack?" The boy continued to puff and mop. He said, "Bless if I know. I lost me bearings after that big village place. What was it?" "Grain or some such," said the girl absently. Her gaze was now directed down the hillside to her right, where the emerald roof of a dense wood shone through the sun's gold. There was no breath of wind, even right upon its hill, and the green of the leaves showed smooth and unbroken. The boy put on his hat again. "Better be getting on, I suppose. You've had the leg stretch you were wanting." "Oh, not yet, Jack. Don't let's yet." She put her fingers on her left hand upon his sleeve. On the third of these fingers there sparkled a ring of doubtful brilliance. "Don't let's go on yet, Jack." She looked up into his face, her lips pouted in a way which was not the least of reasons for the flashing ring. He slid an arm about the slim shoulders. He bent his head and kissed thoroughly the red mouth. Just like you, V. What would you want to do? He looked about him with a curling lip. Sit around up here on this dusty grass and frizzle? Silly, she said, pulling herself away from him. She pointed down into the green roof. I want to go down there, into that wood, just to see what it's like. Haven't been in a real wood since the summer holidays before last when Effie and me went to Hastings. Oh, bet it's lovely and cool down there. This last sentence floated up to him, but already she was off the narrow road and beginning a slipping descent of the short, rough grass of the hillside's first 20 feet. He went sliding and stumbling after her, but he could not catch up with the light, fragile little figure in its absurdly enchanted wisp of blue silk. The soles of his thick shoes were of leather, and, growing polished by the brushing of the close, arid grass, were treacherous. 40 feet down, on the sudden jutting and only gently sloping plateau where the wood began, he did come up with her. He ended up a stumbling, sliding rush with an imperfect and involuntary somersault, which landed him asprawl at her feet. He sat up, shouting with laughter. With a shock of surprise greater than any of his short life, he felt the little foot kick sharply, nearly savagely, at his arm, and heard a tensely whispered "shh." He scrambled to his feet to see that she was standing facing the trees, her shining golden head thrust forward, her whole body tense as that of a sprinter waiting for the pistol crack. As wonderingly he shuffled to take his stand at her shoulder, she said, "Listen, birds. Did you ever hear the like?" Her tone was a hushed yet clear whisper, like none he had ever heard her use before. He said nothing. He stood scowling sulkily down at the grass beneath his feet and rubbing at the spot where her shoes had met his arm. It seemed to him an hour before she turned, but turn at last she did. He still had his hand at the kicked arm, for all the world as if it were really causing him pain. From beneath his brows he watched her covertly. He saw the odd wrap leave the small face once more in its pertly pretty self, saw the blue eyes suddenly widen with memory of what she had done. And then soft warm arms came about his neck and by their pressure pulled down his head so that, close pressed against him, and standing upon tiptoe, she might smother his face with kisses of contrition. He said, in answer to the pleas for forgiveness with which the caresses were interspersed, "Never known you do a thing like that before, V." "No, and you never won't again. Really, Jack, darling, it, the cloud came over the blue eyes. It, I don't really know what came over me. I was listening to the birds. I never heard the like, and I never heard you till you laughed, and I don't know what it was, but it seemed if I just had gone down hearing what the birds were, if it was wrong to listen to anything else. Oh, I don't know." The small face was troubled and the eyes desperate with tired realization of explanation's impossibility. But the mouth pouted, the boy kissed it. He laughed and said, "Funny kid, you." He drew her arm around through the crook of his and began to walk towards the first rank of the trees. He put up his free hand and felt tenderly at the back of his neck. He said, "Shan't be sorry for some shade, next getting all sore." They walked on, finding that the trees were strangely further away than they had seemed. They did not speak, but every now and then the slim, naked arm would squeeze the thick, clothed arm and have its pressure return. They had only some 10 paces to go to reach the fringe of the wood when the girl halted. He turned his head to look down at her and found that once more she was tense in every muscle and thrusting the golden head forward as if to better to hear. He frowned, then smiled, then again bent his brows. He sensed that there was somewhere an oddness which he knew he would never understand, a feeling abhorrent to him, as indeed to most men. He found that he too was straining to listen. He supposed it must be the birds that he was listening for, and quite suddenly he laughed, for he had realized that he was listening for something which had been for the last few moments so incessantly in his ears that he had forgotten he was hearing it. He explained this to the girl. She seemed to listen to him with only half an ear, and for a moment he came near to losing his temper. But only for a moment. He was a good-natured boy with sensitive instincts serving him well in place of realized tact. He felt a little jugging on his arm and fell in step with her as she began to go forward again. He went on with his theme, ignoring her patiently half-hearted attention. "Like at a dance," he said. "You know, you never hear the noise of the people's feet on the floor unless you happen to listen for it. And when you do listen for it and hear that sort of swishing, then you know you've been hearing it all the time, see? That's what we're doing about the birds." He became suddenly conscious that in order to make himself clearly heard above the chattering, twittering flood of birdsong, he was speaking in a tone at least twice as loud as the normal. He said, "Cool, you're right, V. I never heard anything like it." They were passing now through the ranks of the outer line of trees. To the boy, a little worried by the strangeness of his adored, and more than a little discomfited by the truly abnormal heat of the sun, it seemed that he passed from an inferno to a paradise at one step. No more did the sun beat implacably down upon the world. In here, under the roof of green, which no ray pierced but only a gentle pervading filtered softness of light, there was a cool peacefulness which seemed to bathe him, instantly, in a placid bath of contentment. But the girl shivered a little. She said, "Oh, it's almost cold in here." He did not catch the words. The chirping and crowing which was going on all about and above then seemed to catch up and absorb the sound of her voice. "Drat the birds! What do you say?" He saw her lips move, but though he bent his head, he did not catch the sound. There had come, from immediately above their heads, the furious squeakings and flutterings of a bird quarrel. "Drat the birds!" he said again. They were quite deep in the wood now. Looking around, he could not see at all the sun-drenched grass plateau from which they had come. He felt a tugging at his arm. The girl was pointing to a gently sloped bed of thick moss which was like a carpet spread at the foot of an old and twisted tree. They sauntered to this carpet and sat down upon it, the boy sawing at ease, the girl very straight of back, with her hands clasped tightly about her raised knees. Had he been looking at her rather than at the pipe he was filling, he would not have seen that the craning toward of her head. He did not finish the filling of his pipe. The singing of the birds went on. It seemed to gather volume until the whole world was filled with its chaotic whistling. The boy found, now that he had once consciously listened for and to it, that he could not again make his ears unconscious of the sound. The sound, with which its seemingly momentarily increasing volume, was now plucking at the nerves within his head, indeed over his whole body, that he felt he could not sit much longer to endure it. He thrust pipe and pouch savagely back into his pocket and turned to say to the girl that the quicker they got away from this winking twittering, the better he'd be pleased. But the words died upon his lips, for even as he turned, he became aware of the diminutive of the reedy babble. He saw, too, calmer now, with a decrease of irritation, that the girl was still in rapt attention. So he held his tongue. The singing of the birds grew less and lesser with each moment. He began to feel drowsy, and once caught himself with a startled jerk from the edge of actual slumber. He peered sideways at his companion and saw that she sat rigid. Not by the breadth of a hair had she altered her first attempted pose. He felt again for pipe and pouch. His fingers idle in the jacket pocket, he found himself listening again. Only this time he listened because he wanted to listen. There was now but one bird who sang, and the boy was curiously conscious, hearing these liquid notes alone, and in the fullness of the uninterrupted and almost unbearable beauty, that the reason for this hatred of that full and somehow discordant chorus, which a few moments ago had nearly driven him from the trees and their lovely shelter, had been his inability to hear more than an isolated note or two of this song, whose existence then he had realized only subconsciously. The full, deep notes ceased their rapid and increased trilling, cutting their sound off sharply, almost in the manner of an operatic singer. There was, then, only silence in the wood. It lasted, for the town-bred boy and girl caught suddenly in this placid whirlpool of natural beauty, for moments which seemed strained in incalculable ages. And then into this pool of pregnant no sound were dropped, one by one, six exquisite jewels of sound, each pause between these isolated loveliness's being of twice the duration of its predecessor. After the last of these notes, deep and varying and crystal pure, yet misty with unimaginable beauties, the silence fell again. A silence, not pregnant as the last, with the vibrant foreshadowings of the magic to come, but a silence which had in the utter and miserable quietness of endings in nothingness. The boy's arm went up and wrapped itself gently about the slim, barely covered shoulders. Two heads turned, and dark eyes looked into the blue. The blue were abrim with unshed tears. She whispered, "It was him I was listening to all the while. I could hear that all through the others." The tear brimmed over and rolled down the pale cheek. The arm about her shoulder tightened, and at last she relaxed. The little body grew limp and lay against his strength. "You lay quiet, darling," he said. His voice trembled a little, and he spoke in the hushed voice of a man who knows himself in a holy or enchanted place. Then silence. Silence which weighed and pressed upon a man's soul. Silence which seemed a living deadness about them. From the boy's shoulder came a hushed, small voice which endeavored to conceal its shaking. It said, I I felt all along. We shouldn't we shouldn't be here. We didn't ought to have come. Despite its quietness, there was something like panic in the voice. He spoke reassuring words. To shake her from this queer, repressed hysteria, he said these words in a loud and virile tone, but this had only the effect of conveying to himself something of the odd disquiet which had possessed the girl. It's cold in here, she whispered suddenly. Her body pressed itself against him. He laughed, an odd sound. He said hastily, Cold? You're talking up the back of your neck, V. It is, she said, but her voice was more natural now. We'd better be getting along, hadn't we? He nodded. Think we had, he said, stirred as if to get to his feet, but a small hand suddenly gripped his arm, and her voice whispered, Look, look! It was her own voice again, but so that, even while he started a little at her sudden clutch and the urgency of her tone, he felt a wave of relief and sudden quieting of his own vague but discomfortable uneasiness. His gaze followed the line of her pointing finger. He saw upon the carpeting of rotted twigs and brown moldering leaves, just at the point where this brown and dark cool green of the moss bank met, a small bird. It stood upon its slender sticks of legs and gazed up at them over the plump, bright-hued breast with shining little eyes. Its head was cocked to one side. "Do you know," said the girl's whisper, "that's the first one we've seen." The boy pondered for a moment. "Gosh," he said at last, "so it is, and all." They watched in silence. The bird hopped nearer. "Isn't he sweet, Jack?" Her whisper was a delighted chuckle. "Talk about tame," said the boy softly. "Cunning little beggar." Her elbow nudged his ribs. She said, her lips barely moving, "Keep still. If we don't move, I believe he'll come right up to us." Almost on her words, the bird hopped nearer. Now he was actually upon the moss, and thus less than an inch from the toe of the girl's left shoe. His little pert head, which of a shining green with a rather comically long beak of yellow, was still cocked to one side. His bright, small eyes still surveyed them with the unwinking stare of his kind. The girl's fascinated eyes were upon the small creature. She saw nothing else. Not so the boy. There was a nudge, this time from his elbow. "Look there," he whispered, pointing, "and there." She took, reluctantly enough, her eyes from the small intruder by her foot. She gazed in the directions he had indicated. She gasped in wonder. She whispered, "Why, they're all coming to see us." Everywhere between the boles of the closing green trees were birds. Some stood singly, some in pairs, some little clumps of four and more. Some seemed, even to urban eyes, patently of the same family as their first visitor, who still stood by the white shoe, staring up at the face of its owner. But there were many more families. There were very small birds, and birds of sparrow size, but unsparrow-like plumage, and the birds which were a little bigger than this, and birds which were twice and three times the size. But one and all faced the carpet of moss and stared with their shining eyes at the two humans who lay upon it. "This," said the boy, "is the rummest start I ever—" The girl's elbow nudged him to silence. He followed the nod of her head and looking down, saw that the first visitor was now perched actually upon her instep. He seemed very much at ease there, but he was no longer looking up at them with those bright little eyes, and his head was no longer cocked to one side. It was level, so that he appeared to be in contemplation of his silk-clad chin. Something, perhaps it was a little whispering, pattering rustle among the rotting leaves of the wood's carpet, took the boy's fascinated eyes from this strange sight. He lifted them to see a stranger, a sight perhaps more fascinating, but with no means the same fascination. The birds were nearer, much, much nearer, and their line was solid now, an unbroken semicircle with bounding lines so wide flung that he felt rather than saw its extent. One little corner of his brain for an instant busied itself with wild essays at numerical computation, but reeled back defeated by the impossibility of the task. Even as he stared, his face paled now, and his eyes wide with something like terror, that semicircle drew yet nearer, each unit of it taking 4 hops and 4 hops only. Now, its line unmarred, it was close upon the edge of the moss. But was it only a semicircle? A dread doubt of this flashed into his mind. One horrified glance across his shoulder told him that semicircle it was not. Full circle it was. Birds, birds, birds! Was it possible that the world itself should hold such a number of birds? Eyes. Small, shining, mirrored button points of glittering eyes, all fixed upon him, and, God, upon her! In one wild glance he saw that as yet she had not seen. Still she was in rapt, silent ecstasy over her one bird, and this now sat upon the outspread palm of her hand. Close to her face she was holding his hand. Through the pall of silence he could feel those countless eyes upon him. Little eyes, bright, glittering eyes. His breath came in shuddering gasps. He tried to get himself in hand, tried until the sweat ran off him with the intensity of his efforts, to master his fear. And to some extent he succeeded. He would no longer sit idle while the circle. The silence was again ruffled upon its surface by rustling pattern. It was one hop this time. They brought the semicircle fronting him so near that there were birds within an inch of his feet. He leapt up. He waved his arms and kicked out and uttered one shout which somehow cracked and was half strangled in his throat. Nothing happened. At the edge of the moss, a small bird, crushed by his kick, lay in a soft small heap. Not one of the birds moved. Still their eyes were upon him. The girl sat like a statue in living stone. She had seen, and terror held her. Her palm, the one bird still motionless upon it, was still outspread near her face. From high above them there dropped slowly into the black depths of silence one note of sweetness ineffable. It fingered upon the breathless air, dying slowly until it fused with the silence. And then the girl screamed. Suddenly and dreadfully, the small green pole had darted forward. The yellow beak had struck and sunk. A scarlet runnel coursed down the timber sheet. Above the fingering echo of that scream there came another of those single notes from on high. The silence died then. There was a whirring which filled the air. That circle was no more. There were two feathered mounds which screamed and ran and leapt and at last lay and were silent. Sweet dreams. This has been Desmond, hosting for us tonight. Good night.